Okay, I think we're ready.
Go for it.
Oh, do I make it live?
I'm already there. Well, good evening, everybody. I'm Mia Mason. I'm here with the high school Dems throughout Maryland, and tonight's host is going to be Leanne Rain. So take it away.
Hi everyone, my name is Lena Rai. I am 17 and I am the chair of the Maryland High School Democrats as well as the youth director on Mia's campaign. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. We are really excited to have a ton of really impressive and amazing youth activists from across the state who have been organizing around climate join us today to answer some questions as well as your questions. I'll let themselves introduce themselves later, but today we do have our endorsed candidate, Mia Mason. Mia, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, everybody should know me. I've been out here doing a lot of social media, but tonight we're here to talk about the environment. As you know, I'm a 20-year veteran who was able to retire. I am a friend and an advocate, especially when it comes to our environment. And it's going to be even more importance to make sure that it's fully federally funded for the Chesapeake Bay Fund, make sure that it's sustainable, and that we fight this climate change because we are in a recovery mode now into our future. So thank you, high school Dems, for joining us tonight. I'm looking forward to all your questions and answers because I'm not the expert, y'all are as well. So I think with all of us thinking about this together, we can come up with a better solution for everyone tomorrow.
Great. Could you tell us a little bit more about your position on climate change and environmental policy? I know you touched on it a little, but we would love to hear more.
Sure. So I am a progressive candidate, and one of the things that actually means is that I want to make sure that we have zero emissions for carbon. We want to make sure that we stop deforestation. We want to make sure that we have green renewable energies, that we have a place for our futures and our corporations to be able to not produce a carbon footprint in our future. We want to be able to have solar energy, battery storage, wind and solar power options available throughout the entire United States of America. And that is possible by getting rid of fossil fuels. This also means that we can incorporate new cleaner types of fusion and fission technologies, which is thorium. So we can work with that to make our economy better by providing new green jobs to the people in the technologies and the science centers out there that are researching this to make this possible today. It may cost a little bit, but it's worth it because we are wanting to stop the climate change that is affecting us right now. Our global climate with both polar caps are melting. Greenland's pretty much gone. Russia and the permafrost there is pretty much gone. Our sea levels are rising, which means that in the future we're going to have to relocate people, and you'll see more devastating storms as will be predicted coming up in the near future. We don't want to have that happen. We have to be able to reverse that. And like I said, it is something that we are in a recovery mode right now, and we actually have to take action to do it. So if that means stopping petrol cars from, being produced and making electric vehicles to be produced, that is something we have to do with a deadline of 2030 or 2025 so that we can actually stop the harm that is going into our climate and make that change happen now. So there's a lot to do, and I want to be able to support the Green New Deal, bring the Paris Accords back, and bring other countries to support us as we go forward into the future.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, we'd love to transition into some of the incredible panelists we have with us today. Shane, would you like to start off by introducing yourself?
I would. My name is Shane Silverman. I just graduated from high school, and I'm working with Mia's campaign as an environmental coordinator. In high school is when I really started my activism. I founded our high school's Go Green Club, and I did that for 2 years. And now, before I go off to college, I want to make an impact outside of my high school and in my greater state community.
Great. Grace, would you like to go next?
Absolutely. So my name is Grace Pilar-Evil, and I am the leader, along with Jessica, of Extinction Rebellion, the Annapolis branch. We are a youth-led activist organization fighting against climate change. So some of the things that we're involved in are local politics, planning and attending climate strikes, and much more within the community. So I'm a rising senior at Severn School in Severna Park. I first became passionate about the environment when I adopted a plant-based diet, and I learned about the relationship between animal agriculture and anthropogenic climate change. So then as time went on, I became more and more interested and also frustrated with the state of the world with regard to environmental consciousness. So here I am.
Amazing, and I definitely share a lot of those sentiments. Jessica, would you like to follow that?
Yeah, of course. So my name is Jessica Garbachuk, and I'm a rising senior at South River High School. As Grace just mentioned, we are both co-leaders of Extinction Rebellion Youth Annapolis, and I am also the president of my school's environmental club. I'm passionate about the environment because I think that we, as a generation, have the duty to make the world a better place for the people who lived after us. And now we've been called on to remedy the apathy of the generations before us and some of the current politicians and act on climate change before it's too late and it drives to the extinction of the human race.
Absolutely. Emily, can we hear from you next?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Emily Thompson. I'm from the Eastern Shore of Maryland. I just graduated high school, but last year I served as the chair of the Maryland High School Democrats, and in that time, Lena and I worked together on a lot of General Assembly legislation involving the climate crisis, and that's where I really started to get involved in climate issues and wake up to kind of the sense of urgency that Maryland specifically needed. Thank you.
Great, and another panelist we have with us coming from in District 1 is Sam. Sam, could you introduce yourself now, please?
My name is Sam Fox. I'm a programs director for Maryland High School Democrats, and I've become mostly passionate about the environmental issues that strike my region because I see how environmentally dependent we are as a region, and current Congressman Andy Harris has not been doing enough to put the climate agenda up front. He's mostly been focusing on Republican ideals, which only hurt our area more than help them, and I really like candidate Mason's putting environmental friendly laws and regulations in place so that my area doesn't fall extinct because of climate change or falter because of the Republican agenda.
Definitely. Thank you all so much for introducing yourselves. The first question we have for you today, well, quickly before we go into this, anyone attending, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat at any time, and we will swing back around from them. We're happy to answer any questions you guys have, in addition to the ones we have prepared today. So starting off, does climate change affect everyone equally? Are certain populations of people who are more vulnerable to the effects of climate change? Starting us off, Luca, could you take that?
Yeah, hi everybody. I didn't get to introduce myself. My name is Luca.
I'm so sorry.
No worries, no worries. I'm from Maryland's 1st District, and I co-founded MoCo on Climate, or Montgomery County Students on Climate. And we work with the local government in Maryland and this school board. And I've always had a natural affinity for nature, and I'm very passionate about removing the political leaders that have a lethal self-interest. And so, yeah, I'll take this first question. There are definitely populations that are more vulnerable to the effects of climate change. Like every issue, climate change impacts those the most poorly equipped to ensure their own safety. In this case, this is lower income communities and generally communities that are BIPOC. And aside from the United States, climate change will have severe effects on lower income communities in the global south and those that are more vulnerable to the extreme weather events such as hurricanes, flooding. And so people in the global south will have to migrate, especially those that are living on coastlines. Also, disaster recovery funds are allocated inequitably. and generally towards more higher income communities. So there's clear disparities in government funds for disaster relief. And also, as we've seen, especially with COVID-19, I mean, climate change is a health issue, and a lot of lower income communities are built around, or rather, a lot of power plants, energy plants are built around lower income communities. And predominantly lower income communities tend to suffer from the aerosols in the air and the pollution that comes from emitting greenhouse gases. And we've seen that in Louisiana and Cancer Alley. And that's been a really big problem with COVID-19. So, yeah.
Great, thank you, Luca. Jessica, would you like to follow that?
Yeah, of course. So climate change definitely does not affect everyone equally. And according to the NAACP, race, not even class, is the #1 indicator of the placement of toxic facilities that emit things like mercury, arsenic, and lead that leach into the surrounding communities and drastically decrease the food, water, and air quality. So these facilities also emit carbon dioxide and methane, which are 2 greenhouse gases that drive climate change. So there are also many studies that say that low-income communities that have large populations of people of color in the United States will be hit the hardest by the economic impacts of climate change. And on a more global scale, like piggybacking off of what Lucas said, the sea rise level will significantly impact the Asian Pacific Island communities, many of which also rely on ocean-based protein for food security, which is also going to be threatened. So yes, people of color are definitely more vulnerable to the effects of climate change, both in the United States and abroad.
Thank you both so much for those insightful answers. It just contextualizes how important this issue truly is for everyone, not even just our generation. Moving into what we can do here at home in Maryland, what steps can we take to mitigate our greenhouse emissions and reduce pollution? Grace, if you can start us off with this one.
Absolutely. So there are a bunch of ways that we can go about this, but a few would be to introduce carbon taxing. So what this means is that you assign a price to each metric ton. It forces the fossil fuel companies to pay, and these fees will increase as time goes on so that eventually they are no longer profitable, and we price the fossil fuels out of the economy. And so this carbon tax then creates revenue for new infrastructure and gives back to the communities that need it the most. Another few examples would be setting limits on beef production with animal agriculture, stricter recycling enforcement, LEED certification for new infrastructure. And then this is more of a broad step, but investing the time and money that we have now into developing sustainable projects instead of when it's too late. And then finally, also implementing environmental education into the public school system.
Brought up a lot of super important points there. I know carbon taxing is actually something we're trying to get through the Maryland General Assembly this legislative session, and something we would love to see a candidate like Mia bring to the federal scene. Luca, would you like to follow that?
Yeah, for sure. So in my work with Moco Climate in Montgomery County, we actually we created a petition with 6 demands for, or rather recommendations for the Board of Education, and some of those included electrifying the school bus fleet, incorporating the role of industry and government in climate change education, solar panels on schools. So I think I've definitely been focused more on kind of like the social aspects of climate change and how we can influence our educational systems. But I definitely think that investing in renewable and alternative energy sources, such as wind energy, hydroelectric, solar, hydrogen fuel cells, are really effective ways of mitigating our greenhouse gas emissions, as well as using our schools as solar farms and retrofitting our schools so that they're carbon neutral. Even though that will probably take a long time and it's a long-term goal, it's really important to get our politicians committed to doing so. And I think Ms. Mason is committed to doing that. and also increasing incentives and tax credits for electric vehicles. Even though I think Maryland already has them, I think it's important to kind of expand on that. And finally, promoting sustainable cattle ranching to decrease methane emissions, as well as regulating CAFOs, which are concentrated animal feeding operations.
Again, a lot of super important points that we can act on right now, and why, as you mentioned, Luca, we need Mia in Congress.
Yeah. Let me add on to that, because when we talk about, those commercial fleets of buses, we also have to think about all of the construction equipment that uses fossil fuels as well. Those can be electrical as well. They require batteries, they require hydraulic fluid to be used. They can use battery power. That is clearly a mechanical advantage when you use batteries, because you get more torque than you actually need when you use an electric motor. That will help us out in driving our future forward, and we can provide an incentive to all those corporations that transition their fleet from gas or diesel to all electric.
Absolutely. And Mia, earlier you mentioned that you support the Green New Deal, which is a sweeping piece of climate legislation currently in the U.S. House of Representatives. So I'd love to hear from the panelists, what aspects of the Green New Deal do you believe truly get at the root of climate change, and do you believe it is a good solution for addressing the climate crisis? Grace, if you would start us off on this one, please.
Absolutely. So the Green New Deal is absolutely a step in the right direction when addressing climate change, and is something that our world needs right now. It calls for a net zero emission plan and 100% renewable energy. So to start off, it expects to create about 20 million jobs by transitioning to renewable energy. These can be in areas such as transit, sustainable agriculture, conservation of infrastructure, and technology. Another thing that I think of when I think of the Green New Deal is holding ourselves accountable for those who are most vulnerable to the effects of climate change, which we talked about previously. But essentially a huge point of the Green New Deal is ending fracking, tar sands, drilling, gas pipelines, etc., as well as the funding for each of those. So absolutely beneficial.
Great, thank you. Jessica, could you follow?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Green New Deal has a lot of different aspects that will help combat climate change. So like Grace said, it plans on transitioning the United States into using zero-emission renewable energy resources, and in doing this, millions of high-paying jobs will be created in the United States to repair and upgrade the infrastructure, expand renewable energy resources, and build and upgrade smart power grids. So I believe that because of all these things, the Green New Deal is a good solution to addressing climate change. It's a good step in the right direction, and it will simultaneously address the racial injustice that's found, like things like environmental racism. While the Green New Deal is expensive, the United States is wealthy enough to complete the project, and it's a really big investment in the future of the United States. And I like that candidates like Mia Mason support the Green New Deal.
Good. Thank you. And to add on to, what this Green New Deal means is that because you are the newest generation to come into the workforce, do not think that you just have to go work for an employer. Think of all of this new technology is out there. Our governor wants to be able to have us in Maryland manufacturing these technologies here in Maryland so that we can expand and sell it throughout the entire United States. We want this stuff to be made in Maryland, made in the United States. So go to the SBA, ask for a loan, start a business, make these products here in America so that we can get this Green New Deal completed.
Absolutely. Zoning in on District 1, a large part of which is the Eastern Shore of Maryland, which is a gem, but in a lot of danger. The Eastern Shore is very vulnerable to climate change and rising sea levels. what do you all think needs to be done in order to prevent further shore erosion and protect the future of the region? Emily, as someone who lived in Caroline County for all her life, I would love to hear from you.
Yeah, so the Chesapeake Bay region is one of the places that's going to be ground zero on the planet for sea level change. You know, we have over 3,000 miles of tidal shoreline that will experience nearly daily flooding by 2100, you know, regardless of any human choices. So it's important that we pass a statewide version of the Green New Deal, you know, as along with the National Green New Deal, of course, and cut our carbon emissions by 2025. And it's also important that we invest and educate our many farmers here to research and fund sustainable farming, because one, it's one of the biggest careers here on the shore, and it's how we live. We are going to be, our farmers are going to feel climate change the most. So, and they're also at the forefront of that battle. On the Eastern Shore, it's also opposing hurtful proposals like the Delmarva pipeline, and it's investing in resources here to create jobs here, like our offshore wind project.
Absolutely. Again, so many things that we can act on now, but we need a representative like Mia fighting for those. Sam, you're also in Caroline County. Could you add to that?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing to us right now is legislation. We live in an area that's primarily agricultural, and a man like Andy Harris, he's voted nothing but to hurt those farmers and those people that rely on the conservation of environment to make sure that we're sustainable economically. And if we vote in a candidate like me, Mason, she'll make sure to keep our environmental needs at the forefront and make sure that we have a sustainable environment for the next 100 years and for the generations that come behind us.
Yep. You're absolutely correct. And I thank you for those answers, because I'm not like Grant King Andy Harris to just, you know, think of the issues when it comes to an election year and Band-Aid push it here and there. You know, I understand the farmers' concern. They were hurt by Trump. They were hurt by Harris, you know, especially when it comes to, you know, the climate, when it comes to, you know, trade deals with, you know, China, Mexico, Canada, European Union. Everything that gets shipped out on those container ships out in the Chesapeake Bay are vital shipping lanes for our entire country. It is important for us to get our goods out there. But when our farmers aren't making a profit, we need something like UBI to be able to give them a base salary per month so that they can have a lifestyle to live on. Because if not, they're going to be like us, getting out of high school, working 2 to 3 jobs until we actually have a place to do something later on after we complete college and have a career. Our farmers have a legacy. It is their land. They have to be able to continue that. And that's why we want them to vote for me, so that we can invest in them to make sure that we have this Green New Deal in the state legislature and on the federal side to fully fund them into the future for you and the next generation of farmers.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Mia. Shane, would you like to finish us off for this question?
I would. Eastern Shore definitely is a very unique area of Maryland, concerning the rest of the main shore with its proximity to the water. And there are a lot of solutions that I like to divide into 2 different categories, where there's natural solutions, where if you think maybe 400 years ago or however long ago John Smith was exploring the bay, the way it was built by nature with marshlands and trees and grasslands, it was naturally designed to protect itself. However, we've done away with all those protections, and so we can re-implement those, which have been around for thousands of years, by expanding marshlands, sustainable farming that's better for the environment, that will filter out pollutions before it gets into the tributaries and the bay itself. And then we can also invent new infrastructure, like renewing sewer lines so they don't overflood and drain pollutants into cities and main streets, and we can also invest into things like porous concrete that soak up pollutants before they even reach the tributaries.
Definitely. Thank you for that. All right, moving into our last question for today. People often associate environmental regulations to result in economic loss. Do you guys believe this is a fair assessment, and how can environmental policy, including the ones we talked about today, or any others you'd like to bring up, create jobs? Jessica, if you could start us off on this one.
Yeah, definitely. So I don't think it's a fair assessment to associate environmental regulations with economic loss. The United Nations expects that the average global temperature increase will vary from 2.9 to 3.4 degrees Celsius by 2100. And a report that examined how climate change could affect the economy, it went into 22 different sectors, stated that by 2100, if we keep the average temperature increase below 2.8 degrees, the United States would lose $298 billion. And so another study said that the United States is expected to experience such large economic losses, putting us only second to India in the amount of those losses. So as I outlined in my previous responses, environmental policy like the Green New Deal can not only create jobs, but also prevent the economic losses that will occur due to climate change. There will definitely be costs in implementing these policies, but the United States has the opportunity to ensure a bright future for its citizens by trailblazing climate change response and contributing to a cleaner, less polluted society. And I think that candidates like Mia Mason can help us move forward through their progressive environmental policy.
Absolutely. Sam, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, so I think when it's associated with economic loss, I think most of the people saying that are thinking solely short term. So what we really have to look at is the long-term picture and how much economic growth we can actually benefit from for environmental protections. In the Green New Deal, as you guys stated before, it's estimated to create 20 million new jobs. And it's going to end up helping our farmers and helping our agricultural businesses instead of hurting them. So if we do continue to let this climate crisis ravage our country, we'll end up with a huge poverty problem in people who work solely in agricultural industries like farmers and things like that. And that'll really screw up our economy. So right now we need to be looking at the long-term benefits of creating environmental protection bills and eco-friendly progressive legislation instead of how it can harm us for a couple months.
All very true, great points. Emily, can you take that as well?
Yeah, so I completely agree with Jessica and Sam that it is not a fair assessment. It's not only preventing the crisis that the climate will amount to, it's investing in, I think it's $10.7 trillion in our new green economy. And these jobs won't just rebuild our country's infrastructure. They won't tackle the climate crisis. They're going to help rebuild the middle class. And it's going to take workers from all kinds to rebuild and repower our energy grid and upgrade our transportation, our buildings, our water systems to guard off the worst effects of the climate crisis, and protect our vulnerable communities. And this is going to take workers from every single part of America. So when people like Andy Harris oppose legislation like the Green New Deal, they're not just denying the climate crisis and the effects that it will bring, they're opposing the creation of millions and millions of jobs.
Really, really important point. Shane, could you finish us up on this question as well?
Yeah, totally. So a lot of people who feel threatened by climate infrastructure and jobs are farmers in the way that they don't see a future where they can continue to farm without being threatened. But we haven't. This isn't the first time we've proposed reinventing the way we farmed. The Dust Bowl, which was a terrible environmental disaster, actually caused by poor farming practices. After that, our country went through a agricultural revolution where we changed the way we produce our products, we engineer our produce to be more efficient and environmentally sustainable, use less water, and involve better soil practices. And part of the Green New Deal is doing that again, where when you take the idea of a farmer of producing food, but you can make it so that a farmer isn't necessarily just producing biological food like meat and vegetation, but they can also produce energy, where the farmer, you still keep your land, but maybe instead of chickens, you are producing wind energy or solar energy, where you're no longer producing the same product, but your role in society stays the same.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Shane. We have a question from the audience for whoever would like to answer it. Thank you for your question, Richard. He asked, given the preponderance of the poultry industry on the shore, what can MIA do to minimize the problems created by chicken waste and runoff into our waterways?
That's a good question. I got an answer. Anybody else got an answer?
We can start with you, Mia.
Okay. Well, normally a farmer can dry out that chicken waste and sell it as fertilizer, but we need to be able to make sure that everybody has a modern way of bringing industrial waste into the city system so that it can be properly filtered and not go into any ecological reservoirs, rivers, or the bay itself. Therefore, if it goes down the drain, it will be part of industrial waste. That will be the proper way to make sure that it is disposed of properly. That's if the farmer doesn't invest in properly disposing of it on their property to then turn it around and sell it as a product once they're able to dry it out. So that's my option. There's two different ways to do it. One's going to require federal and state resources to provide a national project to go out and help those farmers.
Thank you for that. Does anyone have anything to add? Okay. Well, as we mentioned, and we've mentioned previously, dealing with livestock and the way we approach agricultural means is definitely something we need to consider in making sure that we are supporting our farmers and that middle class through this change into a green economy. And as we've been saying this entire time, that's Mia's prerogative, not Harris's, as he's proven time and time again. If the audience doesn't have any more questions, if you do, please submit that right now and we'll be happy to answer it. If not, if any panelists have closing thoughts, or just a message that they would like the audience to hear about why this is so important for our generation as young Americans, I'd love to hear it.
I'd be happy to give closing thoughts if that's okay. Yeah, so I'm from the 1st District, and I didn't know much about Mia Mason before Lena invited me, but I did a lot of research on your policies, and I was super impressed. I mean, I think you're doing doing a better job than a majority of the people already in Congress. And I feel like your campaign represents political integrity, and I think that your decision to not accept money from campaign or from industries and super PACs is an extremely good one. And I think, like I mentioned, you represent political integrity, and I think you are one example of a candidate that will replace a lot of the self-interested ones that we have in Congress at the moment. So thank you for your work, and I'm excited to see what happens.
Thank you. I thank you for taking a look into the policy because, we only have a limited space to put onto the website, to generalize exactly what we want to do in the future. If we had trillions of dollars to drop into everything, we could give it to our farmers and say, build up and high as you want, build underground, build as much as you want. Here's the latest technology robots from over in Europe, but the thing is they don't have internet. They don't have IT technicians. They don't have, the support network to help them. The state legislators just now gave them authority to put in 650 miles of broadband, and that's not coming until 2021. So our farmers are at a disadvantage still. And with the Green New Deal, we need to be able to make sure that we help them out. We need to be able to help out our corporations, and this is why we're calling upon everybody to understand that this isn't just about global warming. It is also about the other larger universal effects that it creates. When we build a city, when we build an environment, when we build a road, what is the long-term effect? Why is it going to be glass? Is it going to be this material? Is it going to be absorbing heat, reflecting heat? Is it going to collect solar energy to turn it into electricity? These are the things that we actually have to be able to think of and, help reduce that global warming. But the other thing is that not many people pay attention to is like the magnetic shielding that is around our entire Earth and how that has shifted because the North Poles and the South Pole has also shifted. This is causing a lot more solar energy to be pushed onto the South and North Pole during their solar cycles, causing more increase in the heat in the water. And also the last thing that not a lot of people think about is something that you have on your dining room table right now. You take it for granted. You got sugar, salt, and pepper. What happens when you finish with that salt? It goes into the water and it really doesn't get filtered out. Same thing with all of your other prescription drugs and everything else that you finish when you take your shower and everything else. You think it just gets filtered through, but where does all of that chemical waste go through? It gets diluted, which affects the salinity of our water. Well, that eventually goes out into the ocean where it all accumulates. Well, there needs to be a way to get it back into the salt mines so that it can go through natural processes again to be an aquifer. We can't keep pushing all of these waste materials into our oceans. We need to find a better way to filter this stuff and not dump it or sell it or dump it into somebody else's country, because later on, as the global warming continues to increase, people are going to shift and then we're going to start having border clashes. And maybe this is why we're having a border wall dispute, to have one, because guess what? We might have people that want to come live in our area because guess what? There's no water, there's no land, it's a drought, and because the equator has shifted. These are the things that we have to think about when it comes around to 2100, when you're 50 and 60 years old. This is the things that you have to be able to help us create the legislation to happen now so that it is completed by the time you're that age. I thank you all for attending tonight and bringing your thoughts forward so that we can make a difference tomorrow. Anything else?
I have some thoughts that I wanted to give. So I think that the issue of climate change is unprecedented. We've never dealt with something like this, so it can be hard to figure out what steps to take. But candidates and politicians like Mia Mason, they have very well-rounded views and understandings of how these issues impact people, from farmers to the corporate giants. And so I think that with her progressive views and her foresight, we can help to create a better future and leave it better than we found it. And thank you guys so much for having me here. It was such a great experience. And thank you, Mia Mason, for all the work that you do.
Thank you.
So to close, I'd just like to thank Mia and Lena, and to just emphasize once again that I've grown up here in Caroline County all of my life. My neighbors are the farmers. It's the people who are going to get the brunt of the climate crisis. It's the people whose livelihoods are going to be at stake. And it's simply ridiculous for Harris to go to DC every day and ignore the science and ignore the people he represents that are going to be washed out by this, maybe literally, figuratively, whatever. But it's rejecting the notion of creating millions of jobs, of saving millions and trillions of dollars. So I just think it's very important that we elect Mason, because we cannot afford to wait another 2 years to try again with him. We need to do this now.
Thank you. Jane?
Thank you for that, Emily.
Yeah, if I had anything to close off, it would be really to vote. That democracy, it's not a constant right. It's something that we as citizens have to work for every day, in how we interact with each other and how we vote on election day. So really take your beliefs to the ballot, or bring your ballot to your home, and really change the world with a pen.
Grace?
Yeah, I think it speaks volume that, Mia was willing to be here on a climate panel with us on her Friday night. Our generation obviously cares so much about this issue because it simply is an issue of whether or not we get to have a future like generations before us have, without, to be frank, the threat of impending doom hanging over our heads and having an inhabitable planet. And what really drew me to this campaign was how accessible of a candidate Mia has been throughout this whole thing, being open to listening to us, hearing our ideas, and it's such a unique thing to have someone who's going to the Hill who cares about youth, and that's something that Harris has proven he simply doesn't. Time and time again, he doesn't care about any of his district, old or young. And so that's one of the reasons I'm so excited to get Mia to DC this fall. And thank you to all the panelists for joining. It was really incredible to hear you all speak, and great, makes me hopeful for what our generation can accomplish in the coming years. I'll pass it back to you, Mia.
All right, wonderful. Grace, did you have anything to last say?
I was just going to comment, not really adding anything new to the conversation, but just wanted to say thank you to everyone for joining us today, regardless of your background or experience with climate change and or politics. Like Shane said, remember to vote. Speak up when and where you can, because you have the power and the privilege to do so. So thank you to Mia Mason, to Lena Rye, our panelists, and everyone in attendance, because you guys are the change that we need to see in the world.
Thank you. And to make that change happen, the best way that you can do it is to vote. Grab your cell phone, dial or text, actually it's just text, 777-888, and then put VBN in it, which is vote by mail, and request your ballot. We're the Democrats here. We're going to request our ballot and get it in the mail, support our USPS, and keep them in business. And the best thing I can tell you now is these young Democrats are rocking and rolling. You need to be able to help them. Volunteer. Lauren will be able to drop her email in this chat so that you can volunteer with us. If not, go to the website miadmason.us, click on volunteer, fill out the form, and you'll be able to help us out, and we'll point you in the right direction. But the best thing that you can do tonight is look at the bottom of the screen, and you'll see a website, which is actblue/donate/weather, to help us, because this is going to be about the climate change and how it affects everybody from Somerset, Dorchester, Worcester, Wimlico, Caroline, Talbot, Kent, Queens Anne, Cecil, Hartford, Baltimore, and of course Carroll County, where everybody will have to move to if we do nothing with climate change. We have to make a difference, and it begins with you. So thank you all, and have a wonderful night from all of us in Maryland.